A billionaire stumbled upon a girl and 3 babies sleeping on a park bench in the cold. What happened next changed their lives forever inside the walls of his mansion. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. A biting gust of wind swept through the deserted city park at midnight, rustling the branches of the barren trees. Under the weak glow of an old street lamp, a young woman named Lydia huddled on a metal bench, clutching 3 tiny babies wrapped in patched blankets. Her breath came out in faint clouds, and each tremor of her body spoke of hunger, exhaustion, and perhaps worst of all, a profound sense of despair. Yet her arms remained protectively coiled around the infants, a silent vow that whatever hardship she faced, she would endure them for the sake of those small lives. To any passerby, the scene might have looked like another grim portrait of poverty, the type that city dwellers grow numb to over time. But that night, fate had other plans. At the far edge of the park, behind the swirl of icy gusts and drifting papers, headlights sliced through the darkness. A sleek car, easily worth more than most homes, eased to a stop near the bench. The driver was a man known citywide, though he had never sought the spotlight, for his vast fortune and low-key philanthropy. His name? Theodore Harrington. Tall, slightly stooped, despite his mere 50 years, Theodore possessed an air of quiet dignity. People called him reclusive, secretive, even strange, because he so rarely made public appearances despite his wealth. But those who knew him personally insisted there was no kinder soul. Looking out from the warm confines of his car, Theodore's gaze landed on the motionless figure curled around 3 helpless babies. Something in his chest twisted. He could have easily ordered his driver to turn away. Perhaps that was what a more indifferent billionaire might have done. Dismiss it as a matter for the local shelters. Instead, Theodore signaled his driver to stop. He couldn't ignore the sight. A single urgent thought pulsed through him. No one should be out in this bitter cold, especially not with infants. He stepped out, the wind slapping his cheeks until they tinged red. Lydia lifted her head, startled to see a tall man in a tailored coat approach. For a flicker of a moment, she considered pulling the babies away, as if this stranger might threaten them, but her fear was outweighed by an even stronger wave of fatigue. She lowered her eyes, too drained to move. Theodore noted the tightness around her eyes, the dark circles that spoke of nights gone by without proper sleep or food. Then his gaze fell to the bundles pressed against her chest. Tiny faces peeked from the threadbare blankets. The babies were far too quiet. Instinct told him they were probably too cold, too hungry, or too weak to even cry. He knelt beside the bench. The world around them was silent, just the hush of wind and the distant hum of city traffic. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. It seemed like a useless question, but he had to start somewhere. Lydia's lips trembled. She bit them to keep from crying. If she broke down now, she feared she'd lose what little composure she had left. We're just staying here until morning," she managed in a shaky whisper. "We'll leave. I don't want any trouble." Theodore's heart wrenched again. The park bench was no place for a single mother with 3 babies, not in such cold. He removed his scarf, carefully draping it around Lydia's shoulders. "Trouble? You're not in trouble," he assured, his voice hushed so as not to startle the children. "It's freezing out here. Please, let me help you." It felt surreal to Lydia, hearing such warmth from a stranger. She peered at Theodore's face, searching for hints of pity or condescension. She saw concern, yes, but also sincerity. There's a shelter a few blocks away, but they're full," she admitted. "We have nowhere else to go right now." A swirl of thoughts crossed Theodore's mind. He could easily cover a hotel for the night. But what about tomorrow? What about the next crisis? Leaving her alone with 3 newborns felt wrong. In that instant, something in the back of his mind, a memory of heartbreak, of regrets, compelled him to do more than just toss money at the problem. He extended his hand. "You don't know me," he said in a gentle tone, "but my name is Theodore Harrington. If you allow it, I'd like to offer you and your babies a safe place to sleep tonight." Lydia stared at his outstretched hand, and then at his face. She recognized the name anyone in the city would. Harrington was rumored to have unimaginable wealth, though he rarely appeared on TV or the society pages. The bigger shock was that he, personally, was standing here, speaking to her with real compassion. The babies stirred, one of them letting out a feeble cry. Lydia's maternal instincts flared. She had to think of them first. After a brief hesitation, she nodded, tears threatening to slip from her eyes. "Yes," she breathed. "Thank you." Moments later, Theodore gently guided Lydia and the infants into his heated car. The interior lights revealed the stark lines on her face, the dryness of her lips. She cradled the babies, trying to keep them from looking as pitiful as she felt. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror, perplexed, but said nothing. He was well aware of his employer's inclination toward discreet acts of kindness. As the car glided onto the street, Lydia pressed her cheek to one baby's forehead, checking if his temperature was too low. Another baby clutched her finger with surprising strength, as though holding onto hope. Theodore observed them silently. He had questions swirling in his mind. Where was the father? How had she ended up on that bench? Were these her biological children? But he decided not to pry just yet. She needed rest, warmth, food, none of which could be found in an interrogation. They sped through the city, away from the neon lights and crowds, until they turned onto a private road that led up a gentle hill. Gradually, Lydia saw the silhouettes of tall iron gates and grand stone walls. Beyond them loomed a sprawling mansion, windows aglow. Her breath caught in her throat. She had never been so close to a home like this. It looked almost like a castle from a storybook, with towering arches, wide lawns, and meticulously sculpted hedges. The car stopped in front of the marble steps. Staff members, roused from their usual tasks, rushed outside to greet their employer. Theodore stepped out and signaled for them to stay calm, his voice subdued but urgent. "We have guests. Please prepare a guest room with extra warmth. We'll need clothes, blankets, and something to eat." The staff exchanged uncertain looks. This was far from typical. In the hush of the night, they saw a young woman trembling with 3 fragile babies. Whispers darted among them. Who was she? What was happening? But Theodore's gentle but firm tone made it clear. All questions could wait. Right now, the priority was to ensure her well-being. Lydia, cradling the infants, stepped out of the car with Theodore's help. Even though she was still overwhelmed and uncertain, relief settled over her when a wave of warmth spilled from the mansion's foyer. Marble floors, stained glass windows, and crystal chandeliers glistened in the soft lights. She had never imagined stepping into such a place, let alone with 3 babies in tow. A sense of awe mingled with lingering fear. Would they truly be safe here? What would happen in the morning? Theodore led her through a corridor lined with oil paintings of distant ancestors, impressive men and women wearing fashions from centuries past. His footsteps resonated on the polished floor. Lydia couldn't help but cling tighter to the children, feeling like she was trespassing in a world that had never been meant for someone like her. Yet from the corner of her eye, she noticed staff hurrying with plush blankets, baby bottles, and clothing in various sizes. Some offered soft smiles of encouragement. No one turned them away. At last, they reached a quiet wing of the mansion. A double door swung open to a suite with a fireplace flickering, plush armchairs, and a large canopied bed. The staff set down the blankets and supplies. Steam curled from a kettle, as if someone had already anticipated the need for hot tea. Lydia felt tears prick the back of her eyes again. Nobody had ever greeted her with such warmth, not since her own grandmother's passing years ago. As Theodore gently helped her onto a sofa, a baby let out a little whimper, perhaps a protest against the sudden flurry of movement. Lydia murmured soothing words and kissed the tiny forehead, her eyes drooping from exhaustion. Without further ado, a staff member offered freshly warmed milk in small bottles. "Thank you," Lydia whispered, her voice husky with emotion. She couldn't remember the last time she had actual help, real empathy from strangers who expected nothing back. Theodore crouched beside her. "Let them rest," he said gently, eyeing the baby's half-closed lids. "And you too. You all look like you've been through a storm." Lydia allowed herself a single, trembling exhale. "I don't know how to repay you," she said, a note of panic in her voice, as though the enormity of Theodore's kindness had only just dawned on her. The billionaire offered a wistful smile. "We can speak about that when you've recovered a bit," he said kindly. "For now, consider yourselves safe. No more cold nights on a bench." He glanced away briefly, recalling a memory, a loss he seldom spoke of, and then forced himself back to the present. Lydia's presence, along with the 3 babies, stirred something inside him that he hadn't felt in years, not since he lost those who were closest to him. Maybe, in helping them, he was trying to fill a void that fortune alone could never fix. A hush settled over the room. Outside, the winter wind still whipped at the windows, but it could not penetrate the warmth that now surrounded Lydia and her 3 little ones. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she felt hope flicker inside her chest. Tomorrow would bring questions and uncertainties. But for now, she let herself drift into a much-needed slumber, with the knowledge that she and her babies were at last safe. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the guest suite, spilling across Lydia's face and rousing her from the deepest sleep she'd experienced in months. For a moment, she forgot where she was. This room, with its polished floors and gentle, crackling fireplace, felt like an impossible dream. But when she opened her eyes fully, she saw the 3 babies nestled in makeshift cribs set on a plush rug nearby. Her heart thundered with a mix of relief and lingering disbelief. It wasn't a dream. They were safe, all 4 of them. She rose slowly, mindful of the dull ache in her back from the nights spent on cold benches. Quietly, she checked the babies, each now wearing fresh, soft onesies provided by the mansion's staff. Their cheeks were rosy and warm, a hopeful sign that the worst of their ordeal might be behind them. The sight made tears prick her eyes. Once, she'd thought her only path was to survive day by day, alone and without support. Now, in a single night, everything had shifted. Before she could gather her thoughts, a discreet knock sounded at the door. She pulled it open to see a middle-aged woman in a neatly pressed uniform. Her demeanor was composed, yet welcoming. "Good morning, Miss Lydia," the woman said gently. "My name is Beatrice. Mr. Harrington asked me to see if you and the children need anything." For an instant, Lydia was at a loss for words. Being addressed so politely, especially given her circumstances, felt surreal. She cleared her throat. I'm not sure," she admitted. "They seem comfortable, thank you. Maybe—" She paused. "Maybe some formula, if that's okay?" "Of course," Beatrice replied. "We already have warm formula prepared in the kitchen. Let me bring it up, along with something for you to eat. Please make yourself at home." Then, with a kind nod, she departed, footsteps receding down the corridor. Left alone once more, Lydia found herself glancing around. The suite's walls were adorned with tasteful art, and an antique mirror stood in one corner, partially veiled by a silk drape. Everything radiated quiet, understated luxury. She stepped closer to the window, drawing aside the velvet curtain. Below, a vast garden sprawled out, dotted with trimmed hedges and statues, each glittering under the morning sun. Beyond the garden's perimeter, the tall iron gates appeared distant and foreboding, reminding her she stood in a realm entirely unlike the one she'd known. If not for the fact that she had nowhere else to go, Lydia might have worried about imposing too heavily on this billionaire's generosity. But her priority was simple. The babies needed warmth, clothes, and nourishment. In the past weeks, she had gone without meals just to afford formula, and even so, it had never been enough. Now, in this unanticipated haven, every essential she'd prayed for was at arm's reach. Soon, Beatrice returned, rolling in a small cart laden with breakfast, scrambled eggs, fresh fruit, toast, and a steaming teapot. A row of prepared baby bottles rested on a warming tray. The aroma was enough to make Lydia's stomach clench, a reminder that she hadn't truly eaten since yesterday afternoon. She wanted to say thank you again, but the words felt inadequate. Instead, she blinked quickly to chase away the tears as Beatrice helped her arrange the babies. Each infant, sensing the promise of a meal, woke in a chorus of soft whimpers. Lydia offered them bottles, feeling relief wash over her as they latched on eagerly. Beatrice set a folded sweater on the nearby chair. "That was mine once, but I think it'll fit you nicely," she said, her voice gentle. "Mr. Harrington asked me to ensure you're comfortable in every way." With a motherly pat on Lydia's shoulder, she added, "Please eat. You look like you could use a proper meal." As soon as the babies were settled, Lydia did just that, swallowing back tears of gratitude along with each bite. The scramble of eggs tasted like a feast, the tea warm enough to banish the chill that had lodged itself in her bones. Throughout every mouthful, her mind reeled with questions. How had she landed in the care of a billionaire? What was Theodore Harrington's motive in all this? Before she finished the last sip of tea, another knock came. She glanced up to see Theodore himself standing in the doorframe, a slight, polite smile on his face. Dressed in a simple navy sweater and slacks, he looked strikingly normal for a man rumored to wield immense wealth. Yet there was something about him, his posture, the soft tenor of his voice, that exuded calm confidence. "May I come in?" he asked, dipping his head in greeting. Lydia nodded, embarrassed by the plate of half-eaten breakfast in her lap. She hurried to stand, but he gently motioned for her to remain seated. "I'm glad to see you're taking care of yourself," he said, noticing the tray of food. "Thank you," Lydia managed, setting the plate aside. "I'm sorry it all happened so fast. I don't even know how to properly express—" Theodore raised a hand, stopping her gently. "Please don't apologize," he said. "I'm just relieved to see you looking better today." His gaze then fell on the babies, who dozed contentedly in their cozy new outfits. A hint of relief gleamed in his eyes. "They seem more comfortable too." Lydia cradled one of the babies against her shoulder, letting out a shaky breath. "I can't tell you what it means, this kindness. I swear I had no idea where to turn. We were at the shelter last week, but they were at capacity. It's just—" Her voice broke, trailing into an exhausted sigh. There was a moment of shared silence. Theodore's expression flickered, as if old memories tugged at him. "The world can be terribly unkind sometimes," he said at last, "but you won't face that alone now. Not while you're here." A swirl of emotions rushed through Lydia. She wanted to trust this promise, but she'd been let down so many times. She shifted, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I appreciate your help, truly. But I don't have money or a job. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," Theodore said, his tone steady. "Let's just say, I've known what it's like to lose people you love. If I can spare even one family from unnecessary pain, I'll do it. Money means little if you can't use it for good." His frankness caught Lydia off guard. She'd half expected him to speak in lofty phrases or polite half-truths. Instead, she sensed the weight behind his words, a solemn vow shaped by experiences he didn't yet share. She opened her mouth to reply, but the baby's quiet fussing interrupted. She rocked the little one gently, smiling softly when the infant settled again. Theodore cleared his throat, as if recalling another matter. "I wanted to let you know. There's a nurse on staff. Her name is Rosalind, who can help you if you have questions about feeding or their health. She's a retired pediatric nurse but still more than capable. I've asked her to look in on you later, only if you're comfortable with that." Lydia's eyes lit up. "Truly? That would be such a blessing. I've been worried. They were born premature." She swallowed, recalling the anxious nights she'd spent just praying the babies would stay strong. "They're not under a doctor's regular supervision." "No need to worry," Theodore said gently. "From now on, you and the babies will have access to proper care. If you'd like, I can also arrange for a pediatrician to visit." The gravity of the offer floored her. For so long, every day had been a frantic scramble for mere survival. Now, she was being told that not only did she have shelter, but real medical help would be provided. No strings attached. "Thank you," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "There's something else," Theodore went on, tucking his hands into his pockets. I imagine you still have possessions or items somewhere in the city. If you need help retrieving anything, please let me know." An uncomfortable flicker crossed Lydia's face. She had almost nothing left. No stable apartment, no safe place. Her possessions boiled down to a few changes of clothes and some battered photographs. "It's mostly gone," she admitted. "When I lost my last job, I fell behind on rent. They evicted me. I tried to keep up with the bills for the babies. Formula is expensive, diapers too, and eventually there was just no money." Theodore studied her quietly, not with pity, but with empathy. "I'm sorry you went through that," he replied. Then his voice lifted, the tone growing more decisive. "We'll figure out a plan. I won't let you return to the streets." In that moment, Lydia felt fresh tears burn her eyes, but this time they stemmed from gratitude rather than desperation. The contrast between her life a mere day ago, shivering on a park bench, and her life now felt unreal. She cleared her throat. "You mentioned last night that maybe once I felt better we'd discuss how I can repay you. Is there something specific you want me to do? Like housekeeping or—" Theodore's lips curved in a small, sad smile. "We'll discuss. For now, focus on yourself and the babies. If you insist on helping, I can always use an extra hand with charitable projects I'm involved in." He hesitated as though wrestling with a memory. "But truly, Lydia, I haven't done this because I expect anything back. Let me be clear on that." Despite his reassurance, Lydia's mind spun with possibilities. What if she could find a job, or somehow earn a living without leaving the mansion? She swallowed, realizing it was too soon to start planning. First, the babies had to grow stronger, and she needed to recuperate from her own exhaustion. Just then, Beatrice knocked again, peeking her head inside. "Mr. Harrington, sorry to interrupt. There's a phone call for you. Your associate says it's urgent." Theodore straightened, casting Lydia an apologetic glance. "Please, rest. We'll talk more soon." He offered her one last nod and strode out, leaving Lydia alone with the babies again. Left in the hush of the suite, Lydia exhaled. The air felt lighter now, but also tinged with anticipation. Who was Theodore Harrington really? Why had he chosen to help her on such a large scale? And what was this urgent call that pulled him away? She peered around at the comforting glow of the room, the fireplace crackling, the warm palette of the furnishings, and realized she was beginning to feel safe. Yet a question loomed. Could this security last, or was it all too good to be true? As she rocked the babies gently, her imagination stirred. For the first time in a long while, she allowed a flicker of hope to settle in her chest. They had a roof overhead, nourishing food, and the promise of medical care. Maybe, just maybe, they'd finally found someone who wouldn't abandon them. Outside the window, the morning sun continued to rise, casting the mansion's grounds in a honey-colored light. And in the corridor, Theodore walked briskly to answer the phone, oblivious to how Lydia's life, and his own, were about to entwine in ways neither could predict. In the grand tapestry of fate, this single act of compassion would weave a future no one could have foreseen. Later that morning, Lydia stood by a large bay window, one baby nestled in her arms and the other two tucked safely in a bassinet behind her. The room was hushed, except for the soft gurgles of infant coos and the rhythmic tapping of her fingers on the windowpane. Though she'd only been in the mansion for a single night, it already felt like a peaceful refuge, one she feared might vanish if she dared to believe in it too strongly. She found herself staring past the immaculate garden paths and well-pruned hedges to the grand iron gates in the distance. She wondered what lay beyond them. Her old reality, a city that had all but crushed her under impossible bills and broken promises. The memory of that freezing park bench loomed in her mind, a stark contrast to the warmth and safety around her now. A soft cry made her pivot. One of the babies stirred, arms flailing in that newborn way that announces hunger. Lydia moved swiftly, retrieving a bottle from the small warming station set up near the bed. As she fed the infant, she swayed gently, each motion a natural dance of maternal care. In spite of her fatigue, the corners of her mouth lifted in a tender smile. It felt surreal to be feeding her children without the gnawing terror of running out of formula or sleeping on concrete. Midway through the feeding, there came a gentle knock at the door. A woman with silvering hair stepped inside. She wore a crisp blouse and a warm expression. "Hello, my dear. I'm Rosalind, the retired pediatric nurse Mr. Harrington mentioned," she said in a friendly, melodic tone. "May I come closer?" "Of course," Lydia replied, adjusting the baby in her arms. "I really appreciate you stopping by." Rosalind approached with a measured grace that hinted at her years of experience. She peered at the infant with a gentle smile, then glanced at the other two, who were drowsily dozing in their bassinet. "Such precious little ones," she murmured. "How are they eating? Any concerns so far?" Shifting the baby slightly, Lydia explained, "They were born premature, just a few weeks early, but it was enough to complicate things. We've been in and out of shelters. I've done my best, but I haven't had a real checkup for them in a while." Rosalind's expression softened in understanding. "You've done remarkably well, especially under those circumstances," she said. "Would you mind if I give them a quick once-over? Listen to their hearts and lungs, that sort of thing." A ripple of relief passed through Lydia. "I'd be grateful," she said, handing over the baby carefully. She'd longed for a professional's reassurance. So many nights she'd worried about coughs, or the color of their skin, or whether they were gaining enough weight. One by one, Rosalind took each infant, checking pulses, pressing an ear to tiny chests with a stethoscope, and testing reflexes. In between, she asked Lydia about feeding times, diaper changes, and how often each baby woke. The nurse's calm demeanor made it all feel natural, as though they were in a proper pediatric office rather than a billionaire's guest suite. When Rosalind finished, she turned to Lydia with a thoughtful nod. "They're small, but they seem healthy enough. A few mild signs of undernourishment, understandable given your situation, but nothing we can't remedy with consistent feeding and a clean environment. You've done beautifully caring for them on your own." Lydia's shoulders sagged, relief and gratitude mixing in her eyes. "Thank you. That means a lot to me." Rosalind laid a reassuring hand on Lydia's arm. "Now that you're here, we'll ensure they catch up and thrive. Mr. Harrington has already arranged for a pediatrician to come by tomorrow. I'll coordinate with him. Is there anything else you need?" The question made Lydia pause. She sensed it was more than just a polite offer. Rosalind, like everyone else in the mansion, seemed genuinely invested in easing her burdens. I think I'm just grateful for everything so far," Lydia answered, voice trembling with emotion she tried to keep at bay. "I've been carrying a lot of worry for so long, it's hard to let it go." Rosalind smiled gently. "Take your time. Rest is as important for you as it is for them. If you need me, just ask for Nurse Rosaline. I'm staying in the guest quarters near the west corridor." With that, she gathered her things, gave one last admiring look at the babies, and quietly left. Alone again, Lydia stared at the closed door, overwhelmed by a sense of relief. For so long she had managed alone, surviving in constant dread. Where would they sleep? How could she afford formula? Would her babies get sick from the cold? Now, each of those nightmares seemed to find an answer within the walls of this mansion. Yet she also felt a glimmer of guilt. While she and her babies found refuge here, she knew countless others were still out there, exposed to the same harsh streets she had escaped. Why was she the lucky one? Why had Theodore Harrington chosen to stop at that bench? She sighed and refocused on the present, determined to be strong for her children. The hush of the suite was broken by a sudden swirl of footsteps in the hallway. Before Lydia could investigate, she heard the low murmur of voices, and among them, Theodore's distinct, calm tenor. She set the baby she was holding down gently, double-checking they were secure, then cracked the door open. In the corridor, Theodore stood with Beatrice and another staff member, a pair of cell phones in his hand. His expression was controlled, but worry flickered across his features. He seemed to be juggling two urgent matters at once. "No, I can't just ignore it," Lydia heard him say into the phone. "Schedule the meeting with the board tomorrow morning. And yes, confirm the donation to the hospital. Tell them it's non-negotiable." He hung up, only to be handed the second phone. "Yes, Ms. Fletcher. I'm aware there's a crisis with the property management. I'll come down to the office soon," he continued, rubbing his forehead. Lydia hesitated, feeling as though she were intruding on business far beyond her realm, yet part of her wanted to thank him again for all he was doing. She lingered. The door opened just enough to see him finish the call. When he turned, she offered a small smile. "Ms. Lydia, everything all right?" he asked, stepping closer. The lines of tension in his face eased slightly at the sight of her. She nodded, half apologetic. "I heard voices. Didn't mean to pry, I just wanted to say the nurse came by and the babies are good. Thank you." His gaze softened. "I'm glad to hear it," he replied, passing the phones back to Beatrice. "Sorry about the commotion. It's been a hectic morning." He gestured for her to step into the corridor, so she slipped out, gently closing the door behind her to keep the babies undisturbed. The mansion's wide hallway smelled faintly of fresh flowers, courtesy of the arrangement set on a console table nearby. "You have a lot going on," Lydia observed, noticing the stack of documents in one of the staff members' arms. Theodore exhaled. "Running multiple businesses can be taxing, especially with some upcoming charity galas and investment issues. But it's nothing you should worry about. You and the children come first right now." Lydia lowered her gaze, both touched and uneasy. "I just hope I'm not distracting you from important duties." He shook his head. "Trust me, nothing is more important than making sure you're settled. Business crises pop up all the time, but a human life, especially those 3 new lives, matters far more." She was about to respond when a staff member reappeared, brandishing a tablet. "Sir, the architects are on the line about the youth center project. They need your final approval for the design modifications." Without missing a beat, Theodore took the tablet, tapped a few notes, and passed it back. Then he turned to Lydia again. "I'm sorry, it's non-stop around here." She offered a timid smile. "You're busier than I ever imagined. But I appreciate everything you're doing for us." He glanced around, eyeing a more private spot away from passing staff. Spotting a small alcove, he guided her there, where a tall portrait of an ancestor in regal attire loomed overhead. "I do want to talk," he said gently, "about how best to help you move forward. We can't keep you confined to a guest suite forever, unless of course you want to stay for a while. I'd understand if you do." Lydia fidgeted. guess a part of me is scared to leave, but I also know I need a plan. I don't want to rely on you forever. You've done so much already." For a moment, Theodore's gaze drifted to the portrait above, as though it helped him gather his thoughts. "I have resources, businesses, philanthropic ties. Perhaps I can help you find safe housing, or even a job that suits your skills once the babies are a bit older." Her shoulders loosened, relief shining in her eyes. That would be more than I ever dreamed of," she murmured. I was a clerk at a small grocery chain before they downsized. I've done a bit of everything but never had a stable career." His nod was thoughtful. "There's no rush. In the meantime, you're welcome here. I promise you won't be cast out the moment you start to stand on your own." She inhaled a shaky breath, absorbing the sincerity in his words. "Thank you," she repeated softly, realizing that her gratitude hardly conveyed the magnitude of what he offered. A faint chime echoed from somewhere deeper in the mansion, likely another phone call or staff request. Theodore closed his eyes briefly, steeling himself. "I need to handle something urgent," he said, "but we'll continue this conversation soon. Please, rest, eat well, and be at ease here. If you need anything, talk to Beatrice or Nurse Rosalind." Lydia felt tears threaten again, but she managed to swallow them back. "Yes, okay," she whispered, bracing her voice to keep it from trembling. He touched her arm lightly, a moment of unspoken solidarity. Then, before he hurried off to tend to his obligations, he added, "And Lydia, don't forget, you're safe now." She watched him walk away, disappearing into a corridor that led to the mansion's primary offices. The swirl of responsibilities and staff, the urgent calls, the philanthropic projects. This was his everyday life, a life that for some reason had enough room and compassion to embrace a frightened mother and her 3 premature babies. In the following silence, Lydia glanced back at the door of her suite. Inside were the infants, free from the cold, fed, and, God willing, on the path to better health. She felt a mix of hope and trepidation. Yes, she was safe, but her future still lay in uncharted territory. Would Theodore's generosity hold firm as weeks turned to months? Could she eventually stand on her own 2 feet again? Yet she sensed something shifting in her heart, a soft stirring of possibility she hadn't felt in ages. She let herself inhale the scented air of the mansion, so different from the stale exhaust of the streets. And for the first time, she entertained the idea that maybe her life could change, not through a miracle or an accident, but through genuine, sustained support and her own determination. With that thought, she quietly returned to the room, her babies stirring at her presence. Their eyes opened, blinking in the gentle light. She knelt by the bassinet and smiled down at them, tears glinting just at the edges of her lashes. She would fight for their future. She would fight for a chance at a stable life. And despite the whirlwind of newness around her, she wasn't fighting alone anymore. A door had opened, literally and metaphorically, and on the other side stood a man with both the means and the will to help her rebuild. In the hush of the suite, Lydia vowed silently that she would not waste this opportunity. Whatever adversity lay ahead, she and her babies were no longer powerless. They had found, within these opulent walls, not just shelter, but the beginnings of hope. The following afternoon, Lydia found herself standing in one of the mansion's smaller lounges, trying to steady her nerves. She cradled one of the babies while awaiting the arrival of the pediatrician. Through the lounge's tall windows, the pale winter light cast elongated shadows on the polished floor. Despite having slept in a warm bed with the infants near her, she'd tossed and turned, haunted by lingering doubts about her sudden good fortune. She reminded herself that this checkup was a chance to ensure the babies were healthy, something she'd prayed for endlessly back when they slept under overpasses or in overcrowded shelters. Still, a small knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. What if the doctor discovered something dire? She braced herself, determined to face whatever news came. The lounge door swung open gently, and Nurse Rosalind peered inside, smiling. "Dr. Sutton is here, dear. Ready?" Lydia exhaled. "As ready as I can be," she answered softly, adjusting her hold on the baby. Together, they walked down a wide corridor where staff had set up a temporary medical station, basically a small table with instruments and a cozy spot for the babies to lie down. Standing there was Dr. Sutton, a kindly woman in her mid-40s who wore a neat ponytail and carried herself with a brisk, reassuring confidence. "Hello, Lydia," she said, extending a hand. "I've been briefed a bit by Nurse Rosalind. Let's take a thorough look at these little ones, shall we?" Lydia offered a small, grateful smile. "Thank you for coming all the way here." Dr. Sutton waved off the gratitude. Mr. Harrington's call had a certain urgency in his voice. "Told me we had 3 special patients who've had a rough start." Hearing that, Lydia felt her heart clench with emotion. The mere idea that Theodore had conveyed their situation so earnestly melted her defenses. She carefully placed the baby she held onto the soft surface arranged for the examination, then retrieved the other 2 who were dozing peacefully in a nearby bassinet. Over the next hour, Dr. Sutton examined each infant meticulously, checking weight, height, reflexes, and feeding responses. She asked Lydia questions about their birth, the circumstances of the early weeks, and any health scares. Lydia did her best to detail each moment of crisis on the streets, each scare she'd faced when a child wheezed or felt too hot. Despite her nerves, Lydia observed how Dr. Sutton handled the babies with tenderness and competence. The lounge's quiet hush only broke when one baby let out a tiny wail at the coldness of the stethoscope, or when Rosalind jotted down notes. Lydia stood close by, arms wrapped around herself, resisting the urge to hover. Finally, Dr. Sutton set aside her instruments. "Well," she began, smoothing a hand over the baby's soft head. "All 3 are underweight and behind on a few developmental milestones, which isn't surprising given the circumstances, but I see no sign of permanent damage or severe complications. With consistent feeding, proper rest, and regular checkups, I expect them to catch up just fine." Lydia's knees nearly gave way with relief. She sank into the chair Rosalind offered, tears pricking her eyes. "Thank you," she managed, voice trembling. "I've been so scared. I thought something might be terribly wrong." The doctor gave a reassuring smile. "You did the best anyone could, especially out there in the cold. Now, in this environment, they should flourish. I'll leave detailed feeding instructions, vitamin supplements, and we'll schedule follow-up visits." A wave of pure gratitude washed over Lydia. She nodded vigorously. "Yes, absolutely. Whatever they need." Dr. Sutton offered a final pat on Lydia's shoulder. "They're lucky to have you and to have landed here. Mr. Harrington has arranged for everything, medicine, supplies, a nurse on standby. With that kind of support, we can ensure these little ones grow strong." She paused, her eyes flickering with gentle curiosity. "I understand this might feel overwhelming, but please know you're not alone." Lydia swallowed, her throat tight. For so long, she had carried the crushing weight of responsibility alone. No partner, no extended family able or willing to help. Now, hearing the doctor calmly affirm that she had allies lifted a burden she'd nearly gotten used to. "Thank you," she repeated, wiping the moisture from her lashes. With the examination complete, Dr. Sutton handed Lydia a neat list of suggestions. Feeding schedules, recommended formula amounts, signs to watch for, and so forth. Lydia clutched the paper like a life raft, determined to memorize every line. As the doctor departed, she brushed past Theodore, who was quietly entering the corridor. Lydia hadn't even heard his approach. He wore a subdued smile and gently placed a hand on Dr. Sutton's arm in thanks for her visit. After a brief exchange, the pediatrician left, leaving Lydia and Theodore standing alone amid the remnants of the makeshift medical station. "Everything okay?" Theodore asked, an uncharacteristic note of apprehension in his voice. Lydia nodded, letting out a breath that contained both relief and lingering tears. "They're underweight, But Dr. Sutton thinks they'll be fine, she said. It's more than I dared hope. His shoulders eased and a quiet smile touched his lips. That's wonderful news. He swept his gaze over the babies, who were now swaddled in fresh blankets. You've done an amazing job, Lydia. Feeling her cheeks warm, she deflected. If it weren't for you, we'd still be on that bench. He shook his head. I only offered a lift. You're the one who's kept them alive. A hush settled between them. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the window pane, reminding them of the chill that persisted beyond the mansion walls. Lydia clasped her hands, searching for a shift in subject. Doctor, Sutton mentioned the medical supplies are taken care of. I can't keep letting you buy everything, she said softly. I appreciate it. I just don't want to feel like I'm freeloading. You're not, he responded gently. I promise the cost is a small matter. These babies deserve every chance to grow up healthy. And you deserve a break from shouldering everything alone. She pressed her lips into a slight smile, nodding. All right. Still, a seed of determination sprouted inside her. She would find a way to repay his generosity, or at least stand on her own feet sooner rather than later. Glancing around, Theodore caught sight of an empty cradle that the staff had brought earlier. Let's move you and the babies to a more comfortable room, he suggested, motioning to the long corridor ahead. I was thinking the sunflower suite. It's a bit larger, has a sitting area, might feel less cramped. Lydia hesitated, then laughed softly. I already feel like I have so much space here. He chuckled, a rare, light sound. Believe me, there's more than enough space in this house, and that suite has a better view of the gardens. Might lift your spirits. She found her heart lifting at his gentle thoughtfulness. That sounds nice, she said, nodding in agreement. With Beatrice's help, they transferred the babies, ensuring each one was tucked snugly in a cradle or carried carefully down the corridor. Lydia followed, arms full of blankets and the list Dr. Sutton had given her. She couldn't help sneaking glances at Theodore, noticing how he spoke softly to the staff, occasionally checking to see if Lydia needed anything. When they arrived at the sunflower suite, Lydia let out a quiet gasp of appreciation. The name fit perfectly. Bright walls painted a pale yellow, flower-themed artwork on the walls, and wide windows that overlooked the central fountain and a series of hedges shaped into graceful arcs. The midday sun streamed in, illuminating dust motes and bathing the suite in a cozy glow. A comfortable sitting area was arranged before the windows, complete with 2 plush chairs and a small table. On the far side stood a quaint rocking chair near a built-in bookshelf filled with novels and a few children's storybooks. A large bed, layered with pillows, anchored the space. It was more welcoming than anything Lydia had imagined for herself. She felt a surge of gratitude, tears threatening again. It's so beautiful, she managed. Theodore set down a bag of baby supplies, taking in her awed expression with a gentle smile. I thought you'd like it, he said. Then he grew momentarily reflective. My mother loved sunflowers. She designed this suite years ago, wanted it to be bright and inviting. Lydia turned to him, hearing a note of nostalgia in his voice. It definitely feels inviting. She had wonderful taste. A faint shadow crossed Theodore's features, a memory too heavy for the moment. Yes, she did, he agreed softly. He cleared his throat, brightening again. Now please settle in. Everything you might need is either in the wardrobe or can be brought up. And if you feel like a little fresh air, the balcony out there overlooks the rose garden. She nodded, clutching her baby closer. Thank you, again. He waved off her thanks with mild embarrassment. I'll let you get settled, he said, stepping back toward the door. If there's anything else, just ask Beatrice or ring the bell. I have a meeting soon, but afterward, maybe we can discuss some of the volunteer projects you might be interested in. Volunteer projects? Lydia echoed. This was the first she'd heard of it. Theodore's features lit with quiet enthusiasm. I run a charitable foundation, helping local shelters, after-school programs, food banks, that sort of thing. If you feel up to it, I thought maybe you'd like to be involved, even if just occasionally. You know that world firsthand. Lydia blinked, her mind whirling at the idea. She recalled how desperate she'd felt in the shelters, how short they always were on supplies and staff. The notion of helping them, now that she wasn't merely trying to survive, stirred a spark in her chest. I'd love that, she said softly, if I can be useful. You absolutely can, Theodore said, then hesitated as though he wanted to add more. But the staff in the hallway were already calling for him, reminding him of the time. He inclined his head to Lydia. Enjoy the suite. We'll talk soon. Then he was gone, leaving Lydia standing in this sun-kissed room, babies cooing in their brand-new cradles. She moved to the window, gazing at the spouting fountain below, the shape of the hedges, the glimmer of distant gates. The swirl of hope and possibility almost overwhelmed her. A day ago, she'd been afraid of being a helpless bystander in her own life. Yet now she was being invited to partake in philanthropic work, to shape a future for herself and these children beyond just survival. Shaking off the disbelief, she gently set the baby down, then sank into the rocking chair. The wood creaked softly beneath her weight. She looked around at the pastel walls, the table with a vase of fresh flowers, the twin cradles arranged side by side. And in that moment, she let herself fully absorb the warmth of safety, a warmth she had seldom tasted before. Nurse Rosalind popped her head in briefly, checking that all was well. Seeing Lydia's serene smile, she nodded approvingly and slipped away without a word. The hush of the suite settled in again, broken only by the gentle snores of the dozing babies. Everything felt new and precarious, like a tightrope she was crossing, balanced between her lingering fears and the bright promise of a stable life. She closed her eyes, inhaling the soft scents of lavender and the faint hint of lemon polish. The quiet pressed in, comforting in its steadiness. At last she allowed the corners of her mouth to curve up, tears gathering not from despair but from a cautious, trembling hope. Maybe this was real. Maybe the mansion's doors would stay open, just as Theodore had promised. Maybe her children would never again know the biting cold of the streets. The sunflowers on the walls seemed to smile along with her, as though reminding her that from humble seeds, the brightest blossoms could grow. And deep within Lydia's heart, in that moment, she felt the first stirrings of true belief. Belief that she and her children were stepping into a future filled with light, all thanks to the kindness of a stranger who had become their greatest ally. Morning sunshine bathed the sunflower suite the next day, waking Lydia earlier than usual. She blinked, momentarily disoriented by the brightness pouring in through the tall windows. Then, feeling the gentle warmth of a baby curled against her chest, she remembered. They were safe inside Theodore Harrington's mansion. One of the little ones let out a tiny cry, the universal newborn signal for food, and Lydia carefully shifted in the plush armchair she'd dozed off in. She picked up a bottle from a nearby warming tray that Nurse Rosalind had set up before dawn. "All right, sweetheart," she whispered, offering the nipple to the hungry infant. The baby latched on, eyes half closing in contentment. In the cradle, another child stirred, and Lydia chuckled softly. "Don't worry, I've got enough bottles for everyone," she murmured. Though it was only day 3 in this new life, she could already feel the children's strength improving. Their once weak cries grew a touch bolder, their limbs moving with more confidence each day. Just as she finished feeding the first baby, a gentle knock sounded. Expecting it to be Nurse Rosalind, she called out, "Come in!" But when the door opened, it was Theodore himself, dressed in a casual button-down shirt and slacks, holding a small potted plant with bright yellow petals. "Good morning," he greeted. He paused in the doorway, noticing Lydia's arms full of baby and bottle. then gave a rueful smile. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Lydia smiled back, her voice hushed. "They're never on the same schedule, but I'm getting used to it." He stepped in, glancing at the peaceful suite. "I brought something you might like," he said, holding out the potted plant. It resembled a miniature sunflower with smaller blossoms. "I thought it would suit this room, and maybe cheer you up when the babies are asleep." She blinked in surprise, touched by the simple gesture. "Thank you," she said, accepting the plant. A small card was attached to its side, featuring a quote about hope growing in unexpected places. She felt a lump rise in her throat. "It's lovely." Theodore placed his hands in his pockets, scanning the suite with a quick, discerning eye. "Everything okay here? The staff said you settled in fine yesterday." Lydia nodded, shifting the baby in her arms so she could burp him. "It's more than okay. It's perfect. Sometimes I worry I'll wake up and all this will be gone." A flicker of sympathy crossed his face. "I understand, but I promise, no one is going to show you the door." He cleared his throat. "Speaking of stepping out, though, I wondered if you might like a tour of the property this morning. You've mostly stayed up here, and there's quite a bit to see if you're feeling up to it." She hesitated, glancing at the babies. Theodore followed her gaze. "We can bring them along in strollers if you'd like," he offered. "Or if you feel comfortable, Rosalind can watch them for an hour while we walk. Entirely your call." A wave of uncertainty fluttered in Lydia's stomach. The thought of leaving the triplets, even for a short time, sparked mild anxiety. Yet she realized Rosalind was perfectly capable, and the chance to see more of the mansion felt oddly exciting. Maybe just a short tour," she ventured, voice soft. "If Rosalind doesn't mind?" He gave a reassuring nod. "She'd be thrilled. Let's check with her. And if you change your mind halfway, we can return immediately." A few minutes later, Rosalind breezed into the suite, exuding confidence. "Go on," she urged, waving Lydia out the door. "I've got plenty of experience, and I'll ring if there's any trouble." Her kind eyes and gentle manner reassured Lydia more than words could. Lydia hesitated only a moment before hugging each baby in turn. Then, feeling both awed and relieved, she followed Theodore into the corridor. Her footsteps echoed on the polished floor as he led her past a series of tall windows offering glimpses of the gardens beyond. "So," he began, leading her around a corner, "you've seen the guest suites and the lounge, and of course the front foyer, but there's more. The library, the music room, and a private gallery that used to display my mother's art collection. She was an amateur painter, quite talented actually." Lydia nodded, listening attentively. She realized she knew very little about Theodore's family. His references to his mother, always laced with a gentle reverence, piqued her curiosity. "Did you grow up here?" she asked. He gave a half smile. "My parents purchased this estate when I was a teenager. Before that, we lived in a smaller home in the city. When my father's business took off, they wanted something more private. But it never felt empty. My mother was determined to fill every corner with life and color." Their footsteps led them into a large, airy room lined with shelves crammed full of books. The library was quiet, except for the faint ticking of an antique clock. Lydia's eyes widened at the sheer volume of titles, rows of literary classics, history tomes, and modern bestsellers. A plush reading area occupied the center, complete with a crackling fireplace. "This is incredible," she breathed, trailing a fingertip along one shelf. "It's my favorite place to think," Theodore said. He gestured to a chaise lounge by the fire. "When I was younger, I used to hide here, read for hours. My mother allowed it, as long as I finished my homework first." The mention of homework and a typical teenage life made Lydia smile. She realized that behind the billionaire mystique, Theodore had grown up facing normal rites of passage, too. "I can see why you'd love it here," she said softly. "It's peaceful." He nodded, then checked his watch. "We still have time. Shall we continue?" They left the library and traversed another corridor. This one featured portraits of various Harrington ancestors, men and women clad in historical finery. Lydia studied their faces, some stern, some proud, and wondered how they'd react if they knew a young mother from a park bench now walked these halls side by side with their descendant. She started to ask about the paintings when Theodore stopped before a pair of double doors. "The music room," he announced. Pushing them open revealed a spacious chamber with high ceilings, ornamental moldings, and a gleaming grand piano at its center. The floor shone like a polished mirror, reflecting the black and white keys of the instrument. A memory seemed to tug at Theodore as he entered. He hesitated near the piano bench, resting a hand on the smooth lid. "My mother taught me the basics of piano here," he said quietly, eyes drifting to an old photograph on the wall. It showed a much younger Theodore, maybe 10 or 11, seated at the piano with a graceful woman beside him guiding his hands. "She looks lovely," Lydia commented, stepping closer to examine the photo. "She was," he said, voice tinged with fondness. "And so full of life. After she passed, well, I didn't really play much anymore." A gentle ache laced his words, and Lydia found herself reaching out, wanting to offer comfort. Yet the moment passed quickly. Theodore cleared his throat, giving her a faint, apologetic grin. "Anyway, let's move on, or we'll run out of time." They left the music room behind, continuing down another hall that led to what he called the private gallery. A long corridor with wide, floor-to-ceiling windows on one side and curated artworks on the other. Paintings in various styles graced the walls: abstract colors, delicate watercolors, realistic portraits. Some bore the signature T. Harrington. Lydia realized they were done by Theodore's mother. "This is beautiful," she whispered, pausing before a vibrant piece that depicted sunflowers in a swirling field of color. It felt like a more emotional version of the bright suite where she currently lived. She really had talent. He nodded. She believed art should bring hope. That's why she often painted flowers or children at play, joyful subjects. She wanted people to feel uplifted when they looked at her work. They walked slowly, the hush of the corridor broken only by their footsteps. Lydia could sense how personal this space was for Theodore, how it held memories of a mother's love and an era long gone. She felt grateful he was sharing it with her, someone he'd known barely a handful of days, yet had chosen to help so deeply. Eventually they circled back toward the main foyer. A few staff passed by, offering polite nods. Lydia noticed how respectfully they treated Theodore, but also with a certain warmth. He wasn't just the reclusive billionaire rumored about in gossip columns. He was a caring employer who seemed to know them by name and asked about their families in passing. As they neared the end of the tour, Theodore paused beside a tall arched window overlooking the courtyard. "There's a reason I wanted to show you all this," he said, turning toward Lydia with a thoughtful expression. "You mentioned wanting to regain your independence someday, and I respect that. But I hope you see this mansion not just as some wealthy stranger's house, but as a space that can nurture you and the babies until you're ready to step forward." Lydia's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to be so direct about her staying. Gently, he continued, "I've found that sometimes people need an environment of stability and beauty to heal from past struggles. When you're ready to leave, I'll support that. But until then, I hope you'll let these rooms, these gardens, and these quiet corners be a place of peace." Her eyes prickled with tears. Memories of fear and desperation seeped into her mind, but here she stood, in a house echoing with kindness and possibility. "I don't know how to thank you enough," she whispered. "I can't even begin." He offered a mild smile. "By living well," he answered simply. "By letting yourself and your children thrive." They stood there a moment in comfortable silence, sunlight pouring through the arched window. Lydia's mind swirled with gratitude, resolve, and an unfamiliar sense of belonging. Could it be true that she and her babies were meant to grow here, at least for a little while? "Shall we check on the triplets?" he asked at last, stepping back with a trace of amusement dancing in his eyes. "I suspect Rosalind has them well in hand, but they might be missing their mom by now." Lydia let out a light laugh, realizing she did, in fact, miss them already. "Yes, let's go." They walked back through the corridors, side by side, the comfortable hush broken only by occasional remarks or shared smiles. Each step she took felt a little less uncertain, a bit more hopeful than before. And though life was far from perfect, there would be challenges and unknowns, they were at least stepping forward on a path lined with compassion, second chances, and maybe even the start of true healing. The week that followed felt like a blur of gentle routines and unexpected tranquility for Lydia. Each day began with an early feeding of the babies, followed by brief moments of quiet awe as she savored the warmth and safety of the mansion. It amazed her how swiftly the triplets adapted to their plush, new environment. Their once faint cries gained a healthy volume, an odd sign of progress she welcomed. Under Nurse Rosalind's guidance, they started to gain weight and showed livelier reactions to voices and light. In between tending the babies, Lydia ventured further into the estate, occasionally pausing to admire its beauty or to linger over paintings that Theodore's mother had created. Meanwhile, Theodore floated in and out of her days, juggling the mansion's affairs and his myriad business responsibilities. She never wanted to intrude on his schedule, yet he always found time to check on her and the children, often in small, thoughtful ways. One crisp morning, Lydia finished burping one of the babies and placed him in his cradle. She was just about to reach for the next hungry infant when Beatrice, the head housekeeper, appeared at the suite door with a warm smile. "Good morning, Miss Lydia," Beatrice said, her tone friendly and respectful. "Mr. Harrington asked if you might want to spend some time outdoors. The gardens are lovely this time of day, especially with the flowers still in bloom despite the cold. He also mentioned we could set up a stroller for the triplets if that interests you." Lydia blinked, surprised by the invitation. She glanced at the three tiny faces now dozing contentedly. The idea of taking them outside, even briefly, stirred both excitement and a flicker of worry. Memories of the freezing nights on the park bench still haunted her. But this was no longer the harsh street. This was a private garden, well within the sanctuary of the mansion walls. "That sounds nice," she ventured softly. "I'd like them to have fresh air. Let me just be sure they're bundled up." Beatrice nodded. "Of course, I'll have the stroller and blankets brought here shortly." Before long, Nurse Rosalind joined them, helping Lydia wrap each infant in cozy layers. Then Lydia carefully settled the babies into a triple-seat stroller that had materialized at the door. Beatrice led the way as they navigated through a side entrance that opened onto a stone path leading into the sprawling gardens. Outside, a late autumn chill lingered, but the sun cast a gentle glow across meticulously trimmed hedges. Vines crawled over a wrought-iron pergola, and a row of pale roses, somehow defying the season, bloomed along the edges of the walkway. Lydia inhaled the crisp air, feeling her cheeks tingle with the mild cold. The babies dozed on, their tiny hats and blankets keeping them snug. "It's beautiful," Lydia murmured, pushing the stroller carefully behind Beatrice. The gentle crunch of gravel underfoot soothed her senses. She'd never visited a garden so large. Stone statues of mythological creatures dotted the flower beds, and a fountain burbled serenely in the center, its water catching the sun's reflection. "They say Mr. Harrington's mother designed much of this layout," Beatrice explained with a fond smile. She had an eye for elegance and a passion for seeing color in every corner. That notion touched Lydia's heart. "He's mentioned her a few times," she replied, stopping by the fountain's marble edge to peer into the rippling water. "It seems she was very loved." "She truly was," Beatrice confirmed softly. Then, after a slight pause, she offered Lydia an encouraging look. If you'd like, I can head back inside. I'm sure you'd enjoy some quiet time with the children out here. There's nothing to fear. The grounds are completely secure. Part of Lydia wanted to cling to the comfort of not being alone, yet another part yearned for a moment of peaceful independence. "I think we'll be all right," she said. "Thank you, Beatrice, for everything." With a graceful nod, Beatrice stepped away, leaving Lydia amidst the sound of trickling water and the soft coo of the babies. She slowly pushed the stroller down another path, letting her eyes wander over flower beds and neat rows of hedges. Every turn revealed something new: a cluster of ornamental trees, a carved bench by a vine-wrapped trellis. The mansion's walls stood at a comfortable distance, a quiet reminder that she was well within a protected space. She paused at a sun-drenched corner where a small wooden swing stood, supported by a sturdy oak branch. One of the infants stirred, and Lydia gently rocked the stroller to keep them calm. "We're safe, little ones," she whispered, her mind drifting to the contrast between these immaculate grounds and the dirty sidewalks they once called home. "Everything's going to be better from now on." As if to confirm her thoughts, a pair of robins fluttered onto a low branch, chirping brightly. Lydia smiled at their cheerful duet. The moment felt almost too perfect, like a scene from a life she'd never believed she could have. When she tore her eyes away from the birds, she found herself startled to see Theodore approaching on the garden path behind her. He raised a hand in greeting, slowing his steps as he drew near, as if hesitant to disturb the peaceful scene. "I didn't realize you'd be here," he said, an apologetic smile curving his lips. "I was just taking a quick walk between calls. Hope I'm not intruding." She shook her head, returning his smile. "Not at all. It's your garden after all." His gaze fell to the bundled-up triplets, warmth lighting his features. "They look content," he remarked, leaning slightly to peek at their tiny faces. "How are you finding the fresh air?" "It's wonderful," Lydia breathed, her voice tinged with awe. "I've never strolled anywhere like this before. It's so peaceful." Theodore pressed his hands into his pockets, considering her response. "You know," he began, his tone thoughtful, "a lot of people assume I live in isolation because I'm aloof or elitist. Truth is, I keep these grounds private because I want a place to breathe, away from the corporate hustle and big city noise." She glanced around at the rows of sculpted greenery and gravel paths. "I can see why. It feels like its own little world here." She paused, wrestling with a question that had been forming in her mind for days. "But doesn't it ever feel lonely having so much space to yourself?" A flicker of an unguarded emotion crossed his face. "Sometimes," he admitted. "When my parents were alive, the place was always full of energy. After they passed, it felt too quiet for a while." He gave a small shrug, as though brushing off heavier memories. "But I suppose I've grown used to it." She nodded, sensing that he was gently sidestepping deeper grief. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I lost my grandmother at a young age, and she was my only real family. It's hard when the people who made you feel safe are gone." Their eyes met in a silent moment of shared understanding. Then Theodore cleared his throat, exhaling slowly. "Well, now there's more life in these halls again. Hearing 3 babies cry at odd hours is a refreshing reminder that the world keeps spinning." Lydia laughed softly, though her eyes grew misty. "They do make themselves heard, especially around midnight." They fell into step together, drifting down the path in unspoken camaraderie. She noted how easily conversation flowed between them, as if the mansion's gentle air broke down barriers. At the far end of the garden, they reached a vantage point overlooking a small pond fringed by weeping willows. The water glistened under the mild sun, mirroring the swaying branches above. The babies began to stir, and Lydia instinctively rocked the stroller, humming a tune she once recalled from her childhood. Theodore paused, listening to her soft melody. "That's pretty," he said eventually. "Oh," she blushed. "My grandmother used to hum it whenever I was upset. It sort of stuck with me." He looked out at the pond, hands still pocketed. "It's comforting," he said. Then, as if mindful of time, he glanced at his watch. "I have a conference call in a few minutes. My schedule's always too tight. But I wanted to ask if you're still interested in visiting the foundation office tomorrow to see some of the charitable projects. No pressure, of course." Lydia's heart gave a small leap. She'd forgotten about his invitation to explore volunteer or foundation work. "I'd love to," she answered, nerves fluttering at the prospect. I'm not sure how it all works with the babies." He nodded in understanding. "We can arrange childcare with Rosalind for a couple of hours, or if you prefer bringing them along, that's also possible. Whatever you feel is best." She absorbed his flexibility with gratitude. "Let me talk to Rosalind, see what she suggests," she said. Then, glancing at the triplets again, she added, "I do want to get involved. Knowing what it's like to need help, it feels right to try giving back." A pleased smile touched his lips. "I think you'll find it meaningful. Most of our projects focus on housing, nutrition, and education for families in tough spots." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Families not unlike yours once was." His sincerity made her blink away sudden tears. "I really appreciate you letting me be part of it," she managed. "I want to do some good too." He gave a small nod, the hint of a relieved expression flickering. "Perfect. Let's plan on leaving around mid-morning tomorrow then. It won't be a long trip, just enough to show you around." With that decided, Theodore glanced once more at the peacefully stirring babies. "I'll leave you to enjoy the garden," he said, stepping away with a polite nod. "Take your time. There's a path that loops all the way back to the courtyard if you'd like a longer walk." Lydia watched him go, walking briskly over the gravel, presumably to answer the call of business obligations. The morning light caught his silhouette, giving him a faint halo before he disappeared around the bend. Left alone, Lydia exhaled slowly, her attention returning to the drowsy infants. The air felt crisp against her cheeks, the distant splash of the fountain merging with the hum of wind through willows. Once, being outside like this meant exposure to danger, but now, each breath of fresh air tasted like freedom. She gave the stroller a gentle nudge forward, following the meandering path around the pond. Every so often she murmured soothing words to the babies or reached down to tuck their blankets tighter. A subtle joy welled in her chest, the kind that comes from witnessing life through a kinder lens, where tiny leaves shimmer, water laps at the shore, and a deep sense of belonging begins to blossom. When she eventually returned to the mansion's side entrance, her fingers had grown chilly, and the babies had cycled through another round of quiet whimpers before settling again. But her mind buzzed with anticipation for tomorrow's visit to the foundation office. She found herself eager to glimpse the broader scope of Theodore's world, a world that had the power to pluck her from despair and guide her toward self-reliance. Yes, there were still fears. Yes, the future bristled with unknowns. But for now, with the stroller rolling gently over the threshold and the warm interior air embracing them, Lydia felt a growing, undeniable conviction. They were on the brink of something better, an unfolding chapter where hope would flourish, just as it did in the hidden corners of this garden. The next morning, Lydia woke at dawn, a mixture of excitement and nerves bubbling inside her. Today she would visit the Harrington Foundation's office, a place where Theodore orchestrated charitable projects and outreach programs. She'd already arranged with Nurse Rosalind to watch the triplets for a few hours, ensuring they'd be in safe, caring hands. Still, as she pulled on a modest blouse and skirt from the wardrobe Theodore's staff had filled with donated items, a prickle of worry rose. She was about to step into Theodore's professional world, the realm of structured philanthropy, board meetings, and presumably well-educated colleagues. Would they judge her background? Would she feel out of place? Gently, Lydia gathered her hair into a simple ponytail, then paused by the mirror. She could see the faint circles under her eyes, remnants of late-night feedings, and the lingering pinch of uncertainty on her brow. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection, summoning a shaky breath of courage. "It's just a visit, and maybe the start of something bigger." By the time she kissed each baby goodbye and entered the mansion's foyer, she found Theodore waiting near the main doors. He wore a smart but understated suit, the hint of a smile on his lips as he noticed her approach. "Ready?" he asked, gesturing toward a sleek black car idling in the circular driveway outside. "As I'll ever be," Lydia replied, mustering a determined smile. She couldn't help but notice how poised Theodore appeared, like a man well accustomed to representing more than himself. A driver opened the passenger door, and Lydia slipped into the car. Theodore followed, settling comfortably beside her. As the vehicle eased away from the mansion and down the winding driveway, Lydia gazed out the window. Clouds drifted across a pale blue sky, the city's skyline visible in the distance. Each turn carried her further from the protective estate and closer to a future she was tentatively crafting. "So," Theodore began, breaking the comfortable silence, "the foundation office isn't large, but we have a dedicated team. They work on various initiatives, family shelters, nutrition programs, after-school tutoring. I thought you'd like to see what we do, and maybe we can brainstorm ways you'd feel most comfortable contributing." A flutter of both eagerness and doubt tugged at Lydia's heart. "I'd really love to help," she said, "but I don't have a fancy degree or anything like that. I'm worried I won't be useful." He shook his head gently. "You have first-hand experience, something no degree can replicate. You know what it's like to be in those shelters. Trust me, that perspective is invaluable." He paused, then added quietly, "The people we serve would appreciate someone who understands their hardships firsthand." She felt a swell of gratitude for his confidence. Perhaps her struggles could become a strength rather than a secret shame. "I hope I can make a difference," she murmured, glancing out as the car merged onto a city avenue. A short while later, they pulled up to a modest, modern building tucked between larger corporate structures. A simple sign near the entrance read, "Harrington Foundation" in clean, understated lettering. Theodore guided Lydia inside, where they passed through a bright lobby adorned with photos from various charity events. Smiling children, families in group photos, images of hope and community hung in neat frames. "Morning, Mr. Harrington," the receptionist said, standing to greet them. "Your team's assembled in the conference room." Theodore thanked her, then led Lydia through a hallway to a glass-walled room where half a dozen people sat around a table, laptops open and documents spread across the surface. They looked up as the pair entered, smiling in recognition of their boss. "Everyone, this is Lydia," Theodore announced. "She's our guest at the mansion, and I've invited her to learn about our projects. Lydia, meet part of our foundation staff, Susan, Marcus, Alicia, Leonard, and Priya." They exchanged friendly greetings, and Lydia offered a shy wave. Although her nerves fluttered, the warmth on their faces eased some of her anxiety. They seemed welcoming, not the uptight, judgmental group she'd feared. Theodore took a seat beside Lydia, and the staff resumed discussing their current agenda: a fundraising drive for a new family shelter expansion, updates on an after-school tutoring program, and progress reports on a food bank partnership. Lydia listened intently, absorbing terms like operational grants and community outreach. Occasionally, Theodore paused the conversation to clarify a concept for her or ask her input. "As someone who's spent time in shelters, Lydia," he prompted at one point, "what do you think is most urgently needed beyond basic funding? Is it more staff? Better facilities?" She blinked, cheeks heating at the sudden spotlight. After a moment's thought, she answered, "Well, from my experience, yes, funding helps pay for more beds and supplies. But staff morale is huge too. Shelters can be chaotic, and having trained, compassionate workers is everything. Sometimes it felt like the staff were overwhelmed and burned out, which trickled down to the residents. Marcus, one of the staff members, nodded vigorously. That's a valid point. We do try to provide mental health support for shelter employees, but maybe we should allocate more resources there. The team jotted notes, and Lydia felt a shaky thrill that her words carried weight in the conversation. This was a realm she'd never dreamed of influencing, discussions about shaping better living conditions for families in need. After about an hour, the meeting wrapped. People began tidying documents and closing laptops. As the staff filed out to continue their day's tasks, Susan lingered behind, introducing herself to Lydia in a warm tone. "I'd love to chat more about your experiences. Do you have time for a quick coffee in our break area?" Lydia glanced to Theodore for confirmation, but he simply gave an encouraging nod. "Of course," she said, smiling at Susan. "I'd be happy to." They found themselves in a small kitchenette, its walls decorated with motivational quotes and pictures from volunteer events. Susan handed Lydia a paper cup of steaming coffee. "We could really use insights from someone who's lived that reality," she explained. "We have data, surveys, but it's not the same as personal stories." Taking a careful sip, Lydia felt a stir of determination. "I'm grateful for the chance," she said softly. "There were nights I felt so helpless. No place to shower, no privacy, especially with newborns. If I can help change that for someone else." Susan's expression softened. "Exactly. If we can humanize these challenges for donors and community partners, it resonates more strongly than statistics alone." For the next quarter of an hour, Lydia and Susan talked about potential ideas: a day-in-the-life storytelling campaign, better public awareness, ways to make shelter environments feel less institutional. Susan scribbled notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Eventually, Theodore approached, having wrapped up a phone call. "Looks like you two are deep in conversation," he remarked, smiling. Susan beamed. "We are. Lydia's experiences are truly enlightening. I think it'll help refine our approach for the shelter expansions." A wave of appreciation filled Lydia. She'd thought she might just observe here, but instead she was actively contributing. Her past hardships, once a source of shame, had become a wellspring of understanding. After exchanging contact details with Susan, Lydia joined Theodore again. A sense of renewed purpose hummed in her veins. She'd found a space where her voice mattered, and it all felt surreal, yet undeniably right. On their drive back to the mansion, Theodore glanced at Lydia's thoughtful expression. "That went well, I think," he said. "How do you feel?" She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Strangely energized, nervous, but in a good way. It felt incredible to see how these projects come together, and to have my input taken seriously. A faint smile touched his lips, eyes focused on the passing city streets. "That's exactly what I hoped for. If you want to get more involved, you can. We'll move at your pace." She nodded, fiddling with the hem of her blouse. "Thank you for believing I have something to offer. I guess I want to do more, if I can." Hearing them plan expansions, it made me think of all the families out there who are still in the position I was. It's not right that people can lose everything so easily. Her voice trembled, recalling the sting of eviction and the helplessness that followed. Theodore placed a comforting hand on the seat between them, close enough to convey support. "We'll do what we can," he said. "One shelter at a time, one family at a time." Silence enveloped them for a moment, weighted with compassion and quiet resolve. Then, Lydia asked something that had been itching at the back of her mind. "Theodore, why do you do so much? You could just keep your money, live your life. But you're pouring so much into this foundation and into helping me. Is it just guilt, or—" He drew a breath, eyes flicking to her reflectively before returning to the road ahead. "I lost someone very dear to me," he said carefully. "My mother, yes, but also someone else I was once close to. It taught me that life is fleeting and that wealth doesn't mean peace if you don't use it to make the world kinder, helping others. It's the only way I've found to honor those who didn't get a second chance." Lydia's heart tightened. She wanted to probe more, to understand the ache beneath his words. But she sensed this was a delicate confession, so she merely squeezed his hand gently. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "and thank you for everything." He nodded, gaze steady. "We do what we can, Lydia. And sometimes, with the right people, we find purpose along the way." They spoke little during the rest of the ride, each lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the mansion's gates and the car glided to a stop in the courtyard, Lydia felt a fresh surge of eagerness to hold her babies, to whisper that a brighter tomorrow was indeed possible. Theodore helped her out, guiding her up the steps. As they entered, Lydia heard the distant soft fuss of infants, music to her ears. She followed the sound, exchanging a quick, grateful look with Theodore. Her steps, once laden with fear, were now touched by anticipation. Inside the suite, Nurse Rosalind stood rocking one of the babies, while the other two lay happily in a bassinet. "They were angels," she assured with a warm laugh as Lydia rushed over to give each child a tender check. "I'm sure they missed you, but we managed just fine." Lydia scooped up a baby, pressing a gentle kiss to the soft forehead. As the infant cooed, she felt a sweet ache of love flood her chest. For the first time in a long while, the path forward glimmered with genuine hope. She wasn't merely surviving anymore. She was stepping into a future where her experiences could fuel positive change, and where her children might one day see a world free from the shadows she had once known. A crisp hush fell over the Harrington mansion as Lydia, balancing a fussy baby on her shoulder, stepped into the corridor. Evening light slanted through the tall windows, painting the marble floors with gentle gold. At her side, Nurse Rosalind quietly wheeled the other two infants in a small bassinet crib. Every few steps, Lydia paused to jostle the crying child a bit more, murmuring soothing words. She couldn't recall the last time she'd felt so tired, yet simultaneously so whole. It had been a week since she first visited the foundation offices with Theodore. In that short span, her life settled into a new rhythm, one that intertwined motherly routines with budding volunteer work. On certain afternoons, Lydia would leave the triplets in Rosalind's or Beatrice's capable hands for an hour or two to help out with small tasks at the foundation. Sometimes, she wrote up short personal anecdotes about shelter living, which the staff shaped into awareness materials. Other times, she pitched in with sorting donated items or brainstorming ways to better meet the emotional needs of families struggling like she once had. Each day, her confidence grew. Now, as Lydia neared the end of the hallway, she saw a warm glow emanating from the open door of the library, Theodore's favorite reading sanctuary. Soft piano music drifted through the space, an unassuming melody that wrapped around the hush of the mansion like a comforting shawl. She hesitated, although part of her wanted to share with Theodore an idea she'd been mulling over. She wasn't sure if this was the right moment. "Go on," Rosalind urged gently. "I'll tuck the other two in for a nap in the suite. You can bring that little one whenever you're ready." The kindly nurse's eyes sparkled with warmth, as if granting Lydia permission to have a brief moment of her own, even if it meant still holding a baby in her arms. Lydia offered a grateful smile. "Thank you," she whispered. She pressed a gentle kiss to the fussing baby's temple and slowly made her way to the library door. Inside, Theodore was seated at the grand piano, fingers dancing across the keys in a quiet, introspective tune. A single lamp cast a golden circle of light over him, illuminating the sheen of the piano's polished surface. He must have sensed her presence because the melody tapered off in a gentle decrescendo. Then he turned, eyebrows raised in faint surprise. "Lydia," he greeted, rising from the bench. "Is everything all right?" She inched into the room, the baby squirming slightly against her blouse. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said, voice low. "I was just passing by. That was beautiful." Theodore glanced at the piano, almost shy. "I've been trying to play again sometimes. My mother's sheet music is still here, her favorites. Feels like a way to remember her." He took in the sight of the restless baby. "Who's giving you trouble tonight?" Lydia laughed softly, stepping closer. "It's your little buddy. He woke from a nap and decided the world wasn't comfy enough." Carefully, Theodore reached out, letting the baby curl a tiny hand around his finger. "Well, I can't blame him. I think life is better with a little noise anyway." The baby's cry dwindled to a whimper, as though curious about the new presence. Lydia felt a twinge of relief. "He might just need a change of scenery," she mused. "Or maybe he wants to hear more piano." A soft smile curved Theodore's lips. "I'm not sure he's a fan yet, but we can find out." He motioned to a leather armchair near the piano. "Sit, please. You look exhausted." She did as he suggested, lowering herself into the chair and adjusting the baby into a more comfortable hold. Her mind roiled with half-formed ideas, plans about the foundation, about how to help other mothers. Yet, she wasn't sure where to begin. As if sensing her internal debate, Theodore resumed his seat at the piano bench. "You look like you have something on your mind," he said, keeping his tone gentle and unassuming. Lydia exhaled. "I do, actually. The staff at the foundation, they've been wonderful letting me help out, but I keep thinking there's something more, I don't know, tangible I could do. For instance, I remember how lonely those shelter nights were. Even in a room full of people, I felt isolated." She paused, searching for the right words. "I wondered if maybe we could start some kind of mentorship or buddy system, matching new moms or homeless families with volunteers who'd check in regularly, offer emotional support, not just supplies." Theodore's face lit with quiet intrigue. "A direct community approach," he mused, fingers lightly tapping a piano key, producing a faint echo. "That's interesting. We've done pilot programs, but not exactly like that. More mentorship for teens or job-seeking workshops. But for single moms or families, maybe that's a gap we haven't filled." The baby let out a gurgle, as though trying to add to the conversation. Lydia stroked his soft hair. "I'm no expert," she added quickly, "but from what I've seen, sometimes the biggest difference is knowing someone cares. A phone call, a text, a visit. The shelters can be so short-staffed that personal connection is tough." Theodore nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to a half-finished painting that leaned against the library's far wall, a piece of his mother's artistry. "You might be onto something," he said at last. "We could incorporate it into the next expansion plan. The foundation board meets again in a couple of days. We could float the idea to them. Maybe even propose a small trial run at one of the local shelters." A spark of excitement ignited in Lydia's chest. "I'd love to help present it," she said, her voice quivering with a mix of eagerness and nerves. "If they need a first-hand story, well, I have plenty." His answering smile held genuine admiration. "I think they'd be privileged to hear it. If you're comfortable sharing, that is." He glanced at the baby, who had finally settled, eyelids drooping. "Looks like you've charmed him into a nap." Lydia glanced down to see the baby's fingers unfurling in slumber. "I guess so," she whispered, relief and affection mingling in her heart. A hush fell over the library, broken only by the soft crackling from the fireplace. Lydia rocked slowly in the armchair, lulled by the flicker of flames on polished wood. "Your mother must have loved nights like this," she murmured after a moment, looking at the refined space around them. Theodore's gaze softened. "She did. She used to say that warmth and quiet let her imagination roam. She'd often paint or play music late into the night." A shadow flickered across his features. "I wish I'd spent more time joining her in those moments. I was always busy. either with studies or later traveling for business once I inherited it all. Lydia sensed a lingering regret in his tone. The mansion's splendor, so warm and inviting to her, might sometimes echo with bittersweet reminders for him. "It's not too late to enjoy it in new ways," she offered gently. He met her eyes, gratitude evident. "That's true," he agreed. Then, clearing his throat as though steering away from sorrow, he stood. "I'll walk you back to the suite. Carry the little one if you'd like." She nodded, carefully shifting the sleeping baby into his arms. She felt a momentary pang of anxiety. She seldom let others carry them, but trust and closeness had been building. And there was something heartwarming about seeing this powerful, busy man cradle a quietly breathing infant against the hush of an ornate library. They left the room side by side, stepping into the corridor where the glow of overhead sconces illuminated antique tapestries. The baby snored softly, lost in baby dreams. Lydia's footsteps slowed as they neared the door to the sunflower suite, an odd reluctance stirring in her. She realized part of her treasured these fleeting moments of companionship. "Thank you," she murmured once they reached the suite's threshold, taking the baby back into her arms. "For everything. For letting me share ideas, for supporting me every step. It means more than I can say." Theodore offered a quiet smile. "You're turning those ideas into something real, Lydia. I'm just making space for it." With a subtle dip of his head, he bid her good night and retreated down the hall, leaving her at the door with a baby in her arms and a swirl of thoughts in her mind. She slipped inside to find the other two infants dozing under Rosalind's watch. The nurse rose from a rocking chair, stretching her back with a soft yawn. "All quiet now?" she whispered, gesturing to the child Lydia carried. "Yes," Lydia replied, placing the sleeping baby in the bassinet alongside his siblings. She patted each one gently, heart brimming. "I think we're done for the night. Fingers crossed." Rosalind chuckled, giving Lydia a fond pat on the shoulder. "I'll let you get some rest, then. You've earned it." She left the room with a kind smile, the door clicking softly behind her. In the hush of the suite, Lydia walked over to the window. The night sky spread out beyond the mansion grounds, stars glimmering faintly behind drifting clouds. She recalled Theodore's words about life being fleeting, about wealth meaning little without purpose. The truth of that resonated deeply. In a matter of weeks, her entire reality had flipped. Desperation replaced by comfort, isolation transformed into a budding sense of community. The question that lingered, could it last? Could she truly carve out a permanent place in this world? Or was she merely a temporary guest, soon to be ushered out once the philanthropic novelty waned? She swallowed, hugging herself against the worry. Yet each day gave her fresh reasons to trust Theodore's sincerity. He had never once hinted at impatience or an end date to her stay. Her eyes drifted to the sleeping babies, the soft rise and fall of their tiny chests. Here, in the quiet glow of the lamp, she felt the stirring of a peaceful certainty. If she continued to grow, to give back, and to nurture both her children and these blossoming projects, maybe she could truly belong, not just to the mansion, but to a future brimming with hope. She moved to the rocking chair, each step echoing lightly across the parquet floor. Settling in, she let the day's tension ebb. She thought about the mentorship program she'd pitched, about the families still in dire need, and the support they could extend through the foundation. Outside, the wind rustled the hedges, a lullaby that lulled her own spirit. Leaning her head back, Lydia closed her eyes, offering a silent promise to the universe. She would carry on building upon the kindness she'd received, ensuring it multiplied for others who still cowered in the cold. In that vow lay the seeds of her future purpose, seeds that, with the gentle guidance of Theodore Harrington, just might grow into a garden of compassion no storm could wither. Early morning light filtered through the mansion's windows in soft streaks, illuminating the quiet corridor as Lydia made her way toward the small breakfast salon. She had just finished feeding the triplets in the sunflower suite, carefully tucking them in for a nap while Nurse Rosalind supervised. Now Lydia's mind swirled with excitement laced with nerves. Today was the foundation board meeting, the one where she'd present her idea about a mentorship program for homeless families. Her footsteps felt heavier the closer she came to the salon door, where Theodore had invited her for a quick bite before they departed for the foundation offices. Despite his constant reassurance, she couldn't shake off the fluttering sensation in her stomach. She had never stood before a formal board, never pitched anything to business professionals who held influence and resources. Would they dismiss her as just another beneficiary, or would they see her as someone with valuable insight? Stepping inside, she spotted Theodore at a round table bathed in golden morning light. He stood immediately, offering a calm, welcoming smile. "Good morning," he said, motioning for her to sit across from him. The table was laid out with fresh fruit, warm bread, and an assortment of teas. His expression radiated the kind of poised composure Lydia admired and wished she could mimic. "Morning," she replied, taking the seat he indicated. She inhaled the comforting aroma of freshly baked rolls. "I'm sorry I'm a bit late. The babies were fussing more than usual." He waved off her apology. "No need to apologize. How are they?" Lydia's face softened. "They're doing well. Rosalind says they're gaining weight faster now. It's amazing how quickly they've improved here." Theodore's gaze flickered with quiet satisfaction. "I'm glad," he said. Then he gestured to the meal. "Go ahead. We've a little time before the car arrives. Thought you might want something nourishing before the meeting." Lydia poured herself a cup of chamomile tea, her fingers trembling slightly as she lifted it. "Thank you," she murmured. "I'm a bit nervous." He leaned forward, resting his elbows lightly on the table's edge. "Board meetings can be intimidating, I know. But remember, you have something they don't, real-life experience. That matters more than you realize." He paused. "Also, I'll be right there. We're in this together." A surge of gratitude warmed her cheeks. She sipped the tea, letting its mild flavor and warmth spread through her. "I appreciate that," she said quietly. Then, determined not to let her anxiety overshadow her purpose, she reached for a small plate of fruit. She recalled the day she'd pitched her idea to Theodore in the library, how a spark of possibility had ignited between them. She wanted to hold on to that feeling. Soon, they finished their light breakfast and headed to the foyer. Outside, a sleek town car waited in the courtyard. Once again, the driver opened the door for them, and Lydia slipped into the passenger seat, heart fluttering like a bird in a cage. Theodore settled beside her, offering a reassuring nod as the car pulled away from the mansion's circular drive. The drive through the city felt shorter than usual. Before Lydia could properly gather her thoughts, the foundation building came into view, a familiar mid-rise structure surrounded by taller corporate towers. Her fingers twisted in her lap while Theodore gave her a final encouraging smile. They entered the lobby, where the friendly receptionist recognized them and directed them to the top floor, the boardroom. Up until now, Lydia had only been in smaller conference spaces or the staff lounge. This, she knew, was where major decisions were made. The elevator ride felt long, each floor passing with a soft ding that made her stomach flip. When the doors opened, Theodore led the way into a bright corridor lined with photos from various charity galas. Lydia forced her shoulders back, summoning what courage she could. Finally, they reached an impressive set of frosted glass doors etched with the foundation's name. Beyond it lay a spacious room with a polished conference table, cushioned chairs, and a view of the city skyline that made everything seem grand and intimidating. A few board members were already seated, shuffling through printed reports. Others stood near the windows, discussing the morning news. As Theodore and Lydia entered, conversation lulled briefly, then picked up with polite greetings. Susan, one of the staff members Lydia had befriended, offered an encouraging wave from the side of the table. Lydia exhaled, relieved to see a friendly face. "Good morning, everyone," Theodore said, taking a position at the head of the table. "Thank you for gathering. We have several agenda points: fund allocations, progress updates on the new shelter expansions, and a presentation from a special guest." He gestured toward Lydia. "Some of you already know Lydia from her recent volunteer work. She'll share a proposal regarding family support in shelters." Lydia's heart thudded. She noticed how the board members focused on her with curious, expectant expressions. Clearing her throat, she approached a standing easel where Susan had placed some basic slides. She cast a quick glance at Theodore, who gave a subtle nod of encouragement. "Hello," she began, voice wavering until she steadied it. "My name is Lydia, and not long ago, I was living in shelters with my newborn triplets. I've seen firsthand how vital these places can be, but also how overwhelming and lonely they can feel." She paused, hands clasping and unclasping. "I'm grateful to Mr. Harrington and this foundation for helping me find stability. And in that spirit, I'd like to propose an initiative that focuses on emotional and personal support, not just physical needs." She proceeded to outline her concept of a mentorship or buddy system, a network of caring volunteers who'd connect with families in shelters. The volunteers wouldn't replace professional staff, but would offer a consistent sense of companionship. They'd check in regularly, help navigate small day-to-day challenges, and simply be there to listen. Lydia explained how such a network could ease isolation, catch early signs of mental health struggles, and guide families toward resources they might otherwise overlook. Throughout her presentation, she drew on her own experiences, reciting moments when a friendly word or helping hand would have changed everything. She noticed the board members leaning forward, faces intent. A few took notes, occasionally exchanging glances that Lydia couldn't fully decipher. At the edge of the table, Theodore watched her with quiet pride in his eyes. When she finished, the room hovered in silence for a breath. Then a woman near the center wearing a sharp blazer tapped her pen thoughtfully. "It's a compelling idea," she said. "We've tried increasing staff outreach before, but a structured volunteer network could indeed fill gaps staff can't manage." Another board member, a reserved older man, adjusted his glasses. "We'll need to develop training protocols. Volunteers must handle sensitive situations. But I do see potential," he admitted, nodding slowly. Soon the table crackled with discussion. Possible budgets, pilot programs at select shelters, risk management. Lydia couldn't follow every detail, but her heart soared at the overall tone. It was not dismissal, but engagement. They were seriously considering her proposal, sifting through the logistics rather than questioning its validity. Eventually, Theodore raised a hand, guiding the dialogue to a close. "Let's allocate resources for a pilot run," he suggested. "Susan can lead a small committee. Lydia can offer first-hand insights and help train volunteers. We'll measure impact over a 6-month trial." He flicked a glance around the table, gauging reactions. "If it proves successful, we'll replicate it across more shelters." The board collectively nodded, and the older man with the glasses even managed a slight smile. "Agreed," he said, "and let's set a timeline for next steps." Turning to Lydia, he added, "Well done, and thank you for bringing a fresh perspective to us." Warmth suffused Lydia's chest, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. She released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said quietly, relief and joy blending in her smile. With that, the meeting proceeded onto other agenda points, but Lydia drifted to a chair near Theodore, mind buzzing with excitement. She kept her composure as the board talked about financial reports, upcoming charity events, and staffing changes. Yet her pulse raced with the realization that something she'd once only dreamed about, making a real difference for families like hers, was taking shape. When the meeting finally adjourned, various board members approached Lydia, shaking her hand and offering encouraging words. Susan grinned widely. "I'll be in touch soon. We'll gather a small group to design the pilot," she said. "I'm thrilled to have you on board." Lydia could only nod, her throat tight with gratitude. Before she knew it, Theodore was guiding her out of the boardroom and into the corridor, where the hustle of Foundation staff created a mild current of purposeful activity. "You were phenomenal," Theodore praised once they were out of earshot, steering her toward a quieter alcove near a floor-to-ceiling window. "I know it wasn't easy to share personal struggles so publicly, but you did. And look at the reaction." Her eyes shone. "I can't believe it's happening," she whispered, hugging her elbows as if to steady herself. "The idea won't just stay in my head. We'll actually create something real for other moms, other families." He nodded. "And you'll be at the heart of it." A moment passed, a silent exchange of pride and warmth. Then he exhaled, checking his watch. "I need to step into another meeting soon. Brief one about the new youth center. But afterward, let's return to the mansion. You might want to celebrate with the babies." Lydia laughed gently, still on a wave of exhilaration. "Yes, I can't wait to hug them. Thank you, Theodore, truly." He only smiled, offering his arm in a small, polite gesture as they walked back toward the elevators. Lydia felt the swirl of a shifting reality. The woman who once trudged streets in search of shelter now found people listening to her, adopting her proposals and welcoming her as a partner in doing good. Outside, the city gleamed under the noon sun, and Lydia realized that for the first time in years, she looked at its streets without dread. Instead, she saw potential. Yes, there were still countless families in need, countless painful stories, but there were also open hearts and resources, and if all went well, a buddy system that could bring personal support to those who felt invisible. And in that moment, stepping into the elevator, she held tight to the knowledge that her own journey from hopelessness to empowerment might become a guiding light for others. No matter how uncertain tomorrow might seem, she now believed in the force of compassion, and in her own ability to spark change in a world that had once turned its back on her. A month had passed since Lydia presented her mentorship proposal at the Harrington Foundation board meeting. In that brief span, her life, and the lives of many around her, had changed in ways she could scarcely have imagined. The pilot program was already taking shape under Susan's leadership, with Lydia serving as a hands-on advisor. They planned to start in 2 local shelters. Each family in need would be matched with a volunteer buddy, someone who could provide consistent emotional support and practical guidance. Today marked the official launch of the pilot, and a small celebration was planned in one of the newly renovated shelters. As Lydia dressed in a modest blouse and skirt, she felt an excited flutter. Her reflection in the mirror revealed a woman still learning to trust her own strength, yet undeniably more confident than the frightened mother who once cradled 3 tiny infants on a park bench. In the sunflower suite, the triplets gurgled softly in their shared cradle, arms flailing to greet the morning. They were healthier, heavier, and ever more alert, blissfully unaware of how different their circumstances were now. Lydia adored the curiosity shining in their wide eyes. Gone were the days of worrying whether they'd make it through a cold night. They were thriving. "I'll be at the shelter event for a couple of hours," she told them, gently stroking each baby's cheek. "Nurse Rosalind will take good care of you, and I promise to tell you all about it when I'm back." Rosalind appeared right on cue, smiling at Lydia's radiant excitement. "They'll be just fine," she assured. "Enjoy your moment." Before leaving the suite, Lydia scooped each child into a brief hug. She pressed her lips softly to the tops of their downy heads, heart brimming with gratitude. Then, with her mind set on the journey ahead, she headed to the main foyer where Theodore waited. He stood beside the door, wearing a tailored suit that projected the calm, dignified air of a businessman. But Lydia knew the compassion beneath that polished exterior ran deep. "Ready?" he asked with a quirk of a smile. Susan's already at the shelter, finalizing details. A renewed surge of nerves flickered in Lydia's stomach. She'd soon be face-to-face with families who reminded her of her old life. "I'm ready," she said softly, lifting her chin. "Let's go." Together they climbed into Theodore's car. The morning sky was crystal clear and the city streets bustled with people on their daily routines. While her gaze flicked over the passing sidewalks, memories momentarily tugged at Lydia's thoughts. Shadows of that frigid night, sleeping upright to keep the babies from the wind. She fought back the ache, reminding herself that they'd made it out, and now she could help others do the same. At last, the car pulled up to a brick building with a bright new sign that read, "Community Haven Shelter." Balloons in soft blues and yellows marked the entrance, and inside a small crowd milled about, chatting in low voices. Lydia and Theodore stepped through the doors, greeted by warm smiles from the staff who recognized them immediately. "Lydia, Theodore," Susan called, hurrying over with a clipboard in one hand. "So glad you're here. We're about to start the introduction ceremony." Her eyes shone with excitement. "Families are in the main lounge, and each volunteer buddy is waiting to be matched. We even have a camera crew from a local news station covering the story." Lydia swallowed, her pulse quickening. She hadn't expected media presence. Theodore gently squeezed her shoulder. "You'll do great," he murmured. "This is your project as much as anyone's." They followed Susan into the lounge, where a modest podium stood near a row of chairs. Nervous chatter filled the air as families shuffled in, some carrying children, others looking around with guarded hope. Across the room, pairs of volunteers stood ready, each holding a sign with their assigned family's name. Lydia's heart swelled at the sight of it all becoming real. Susan tapped a microphone at the podium. "Good morning, everyone," she began, flashing a bright smile at the assembled group. "Welcome to the launch of our Buddy Project here at Community Haven. This initiative aims to connect families in need with dedicated volunteers who will be a consistent source of friendship and guidance." When Susan introduced Lydia as the inspiration behind the program, Lydia felt a flush of warmth and a flicker of shyness. Encouraged by Theodore's discreet thumbs up, she joined Susan at the microphone. She began to speak slowly, carefully. "Not long ago, I was where many of you are today, uncertain about my future and struggling to care for my children. In that difficult time, something I missed most was having someone who could truly listen, who could see me as more than just another person in crisis. That longing is what sparked this project. I wanted no one else to feel as alone as I once did." Heads nodded across the room. A few tearful smiles from mothers in the crowd told Lydia she wasn't merely reciting words, she was speaking their language. She went on, "These volunteers aren't here to judge or to claim they have all the answers. They're here to walk alongside you. Maybe it's sharing a meal, watching your kids for an hour, or just texting you to ask how your day went. Little gestures that remind us we're not invisible." A light ripple of applause followed, and Lydia's voice wavered with emotion. She ended with a simple, "Thank you," stepping back to let Susan outline the logistical details. Even as the crowd broke into smaller clusters, Lydia sensed the atmosphere shift, an undercurrent of relief, of possibility. People approached the sign-holding volunteers, exchanging introductions, children peeking shyly from behind mothers' legs. The local news reporter glided over next, microphone ready. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" she asked Lydia softly. "We'd love to understand your story and how this program came to be." Lydia's heart thudded. "Yes, of course," she managed, throwing a quick, grateful look at Theodore, who discreetly stepped away to let her shine in the spotlight alone. The camera rolled as the reporter asked about Lydia's journey from homelessness to becoming an advocate. Though her voice trembled, Lydia mustered composure. She told them how she'd been found in the park with her newborns, how a compassionate stranger, Theodore Harrington, had offered sanctuary, and how, through that, she realized that personal connection could change everything. People need practical help, food, shelter, medicine. But they also need hope, she said, glancing over at a volunteer hugging a tearful mother. That's what this buddy system is about, providing hope. Once the brief interview ended, the reporter thanked her graciously. Lydia stepped away, heart pounding at how surreal it all felt. Theodore soon returned, a quiet pride reflecting in his gaze. "You were marvelous," he said, voice low so only she could hear. As the event wound down, families began pairing off with their assigned volunteers, exchanging phone numbers and scheduling their first official buddy check-in. Lydia circulated, offering kind words, sometimes kneeling to say hello to a shy child. Each time she introduced herself and mentioned her own 3 little ones, a flicker of encouragement passed through the parents' eyes, proof that she understood their fears and yearnings. Finally, the small ceremony concluded. Applause rang out as staff announced the pilot was officially underway. A few donors who'd attended came to congratulate Lydia, shaking her hand. She felt dizzy with gratitude, conscious of how far she'd come. Theodore guided her to a quiet corner. "We should head back soon," he said gently, "but I want you to see something first. Someone who'd like to meet you." He led her to a woman standing near the bulletin board, fidgeting with her sleeves. Her clothes were worn but clean, her posture tense, and her eyes filled with uncertainty. Cradled against her shoulder was a baby, just a couple of months old. Theodore made the introduction. "Lydia, this is Carmen. She just arrived at the shelter and asked if she could speak with you about the buddy program." Lydia's heart squeezed at the sight. Carmen's gaze flickered from the sleeping infant to Lydia's face, trembling with unspoken questions. "I heard you talking," Carmen said, voice raw. Is it really possible to get matched with someone who'll be there day after day, even if I don't have a stable job yet?" Lydia gently touched the woman's arm. "It's exactly for people in that spot," she assured. "You won't have to do this alone." Tears glistened in Carmen's eyes. She nodded, as though relief and fear still warred in her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, hugging her baby a bit tighter. "Sometimes it feels like nobody sees us." "We see you," Lydia replied gently. She gave the woman information on signing up for the buddy system, certain that Susan and the volunteers would do everything in their power to help. As Carmen thanked her, Lydia recognized the reflection of her own past struggles, a life so recent and yet already transformed. When Lydia and Theodore finally emerged into the bright midday sun, they paused at the shelter entrance, letting the wave of fresh air wash over them. The city's clamor surrounded them, cars passing, people rushing by, but for Lydia the world felt calmer, infused with renewed meaning. "How do you feel?" Theodore asked, glancing at her luminous expression. Lydia inhaled deeply. "Hopeful," she said simply. "I never thought I'd be the one giving encouragement instead of begging for it. But we've come such a long way." He nodded, offering his arm as they walked back to the waiting car. "That's the beauty of second chances," he said, "and in helping others, we heal parts of ourselves too." Lydia smiled, heart full. She could hardly wait to see her triplets again, to scoop them up and whisper, "We're doing something real, my loves. We're making the world a bit kinder." As they slid into the car, she watched the shelter's sign disappear behind them, the pilot program's success already flickering with promise. In that moment, everything felt stitched together by gratitude: the mansion's sanctuary, the foundation's dedication, her baby's blossoming health, and her own bravery forged from past trials. The future, still uncertain, stretched wide and bright. But Lydia knew, at last, that compassion could triumph over despair, and that once a closed door could open unexpectedly, leading to a home and a purpose she never dared dream of. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.